Доброго дня. Hi alle sammen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Natalia. I'm from Ukraine. I'm currently working as an expert with the Transboundary Governance and Environmental Crime Program of GRID-Arendal. The topic of today's discussion, the environmental impact of military conflicts, is close and painfully familiar to me. According to 2024 Global Peace Index, the global economic impact of violence rose significantly and has led to a decline in peacefulness in 97 countries. The main contributors are, unfortunately, Ukraine and Gaza. 92 countries are involved in the conflict beyond their borders. Today, we face with 56 ongoing conflicts, the highest numbers since the Second World War. The consequences of the war do not follow the rules of the border crossing and have a negative impact on neighboring country and our lives. In line with the United Nations Environmental Assembly 6th resolution, our team is actively cooperating with the experts from different countries to assess the damage and find the solution to minimize the impact of military conflicts on people and the environment. In close cooperation with the United Nations Environmental Programme, we have developed two comprehensive reports: the environmental impact of conflict in Ukraine 2022 and the environmental impact of conflict in Gaza 2024. Both are available on GRID-Arendal website. The war against Ukraine is resulting in millions of tons of waste, contaminating soil and water. 1,000 hectares of forest damaged, hundreds of dolphin deaths, and the loss of rare species and biodiversity. The war has made a hole in the breadbasket of Europe. The conflict in Gaza has also caused millions of tons of debris, destruction of water infrastructure, contamination risk of groundwater and marine environment, land instability, etc. Currently, we are working on the report on disaster risk reduction in Ukraine. We implement the project on asbestos debris management in Ukraine together with the United Nations Environment Programme. And to support the development on civil society in Ukraine, we also prepared a project proposal. To effectively address the environmental impact of military conflict, we need to assess the damage and develop the green recovery plan. Norway is already doing a lot in this area, which is very important. International cooperation and the investment in scientific research are essential to mitigate the environmental impact of military conflicts and to support sustainable reconstruction efforts. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful and peaceful discussion.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for your excellent presentation, which was both personal and factual. So thank you for setting the scene. Before we move forward, I would actually like everyone to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the environment. And I would really like you to come to this moment and think about honor the casualties of war and conflict, not just the human losses and scars, but also the environmental damages. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this moment. I think you are really all present now. You were already, but I think I really got everybody's attention now, and that's really important. So my name is Sina Skålmisser. I'll be your moderator tonight, this afternoon. And I'm very humbled because really we are very fortunate to have put together a panel which is full of both distinguished and prominent experts. So I would like with this to invite everybody to the stage. Espen Barth Eide, the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, will come a little bit later. He's still caught up in another event. But please, Bård Vegar Solhjell, the Director General of NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Arvind Gatgil, Director for UNDP's Global Policy Center for Governance. Thank you for being here. Ingrid Råstad, Senior Policy Advisor for the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment. And last but definitely not least, Karen Landmark, our Managing Director from GRID-Arendal. Yes, we need to, you can put it there.
Thank you, Laura.
So welcome, panelists, experts, welcome, publicum. So war and conflict leave more than just human scars. They really damage our environment too. And that environment that we all depend on for very basic needs, that gets destroyed for drinking water, for food production. Also, these damages, they don't just are locked into where the region of the conflict is. They're transboundary in nature. And they can last for a very long time. And the negative effects can be there for years after a conflict even has been resolved. So of course, some of these environmental challenges, they are already there before a conflict. And they can maybe even contribute to certain conflicts. But what's really sure, that is that during war and conflict, these environmental challenges get worse. They get amplified. So the aim of this session is, one, to assess some of the different aspects of these challenges during and after war, but above all, to see what we can do to minimize these negative effects to the environment because of war and conflict. So I actually see that the minister is there, but maybe we should leave a little bit. I would like to ask, yes, but so please welcome also Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs on stage, Espen Barth Eide.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you happy to start talking right away?
I am always happy, and particularly when I'm talking.
Yeah. So I don't think you need more introduction, but if you each would want to say something more about yourself or your affiliation or your office, please do so. But I would like to invite you all for 2 minutes to say something why this topic is relevant to your work or your office.
Well, I mean, it's relevant as Foreign Minister of Norway. It's obviously extremely relevant because we see, frankly speaking, we see an increasing amount of conflict, and we see a lot of climate change, and we see environmental degradation anyway. Number one, it would be good to have less conflict because we could spend more time fixing the nature and climate crisis. But we also see the connection, which is the theme today. And I think to make a very, very long story short, we have very little insight or research saying that climate change or environmental change causes conflict. So that idea is actually wrong. But we have many examples of how environmental degradation or climate change, either that the background stuff or what is also produced by conflict, reduces the ability to manage conflicts and makes post-conflict reconciliation and the peace dividend more difficult to meet. So Norway has, when we were at the Security Council and likewise when Sweden was and Denmark now is, we've had sort of a continuous work to raise the attention of the relationship between climate and conflict. And then we are seeing, of course, we just recently had the 6th UNEA, the UN Environmental Assembly, and a resolution proposed by Ukraine passed, pointing out how wars themselves can have severe environmental consequences and destroying land that is supposed to be used for for agriculture, for example, or polluting water. So wars themselves will also impact the environment. The massive bombing of Gaza it means a lot of violence and death, but also distribution of chemicals, which undermine the possibility to produce food later, for instance. So there are all these kinds of connections that means that I have a lot of attention to this nexus between environmental degradation and conflict.
Thank you. Bård, maybe from Norat's perspective.
Yes, thank you. And first, thanks to GRID for raising this, like the foreign minister, extremely important issue. And then this interconnection, I would say, which has a really complex causations between them, which is what makes it so difficult. Then just let me add one more thing, and because we focus here on Ukraine and Gaza for every good reason. But if I look around the world, it's like one region or really a belt of regions which worries me. It's the belt from the Sahel over to the Horn of Africa, to the Middle East, even stretching to South Asia. Yeah. Basically because these countries are the worst hit by climate change in the world. So there's nowhere where climate change has come that far. Even though there are very few emissions, they are hardly hit, and it affects productivity, agriculture, everything today. Second, because today, if you look at conflicts around the world, these are among the countries with the most conflicts, and the conflicts that has turned up most difficult to solve. And there's been a rise, in this region. And thirdly, this is a region which is among the poorest in the world today. So the capacity to deal with these things is extremely low, even compared to, the Middle East or even Ukraine. And it often gets a lot less attention in the richer part of the world than, for instance, the war in Ukraine or in Gaza. So if I were to point to where's the future of development assistance and this complex peace humanitarian nexus, I'd point to this it's not a region, it's a belt of regions, which is really a big issue. Then, of course, just ending by saying that this is on the macro level, right? The direct effects of conflicts on the environment is also, of course, extremely important to deal with. And often, I think, underestimated. So it can be on water pollution, like was mentioned, extremely important. Biodiversity loss, deforestation, sorry, of course. But also the degradation of systems, basically. And the undermining of the capacity of a society to run its environmental system. So, we can come back to that, but I'll just start out there.
Yes, thank you. Arvin, please.
Yeah, thanks. A lot has been said, but I think, my name is Arvin Gadril. I work for the United Nations Development Programme, and I'm the director of something called the Global Policy Center for Governance, which is a global center that is to amalgamate information and analysis from our governance programming across 170 countries. But while it's true what the foreign minister is saying, that the NORA director is saying that the relationship between conflict and environmental degradation is complex, we also know a few things. For example, we know for the last century that about 40% of the conflicts in the world have some sort of root in natural resource management issues. We also know that 80% of conflicts of the last half a century has been rooted in places which are high biodiversity spots. And these are facts, right? They're not ambiguous. So even if you just take them, it's clear that this is a core development issue, it's a core environmental issue, and it's a core governance issue. And just finally, just to mention that the United Nations Development Programme is working actively to support rapid damage assessments around the world. And I am very proud when I hear Natalia's presentation here that we have this kind of competent environment or set of experts in Norway that can do these assessments, because we need more of them. We've supported the various assessments in Ukraine as well. Among them, of course, the International Working Group on Environmental Degradation that was launched its report in February this year, which led to the Ukraine Environmental Compact of 50 different, very concrete suggestions on next steps. We supported that process. We're also supporting the process of the environmental degradation system setup that is going to be put in place in Ukraine now, including the center for running assessments. Because I think, as a final point, singular assessments of damage are important, but when we know that conflicts generally are protracted, unfortunately. So we need to think of these kind of assessments as more running, not instantaneous assessments, but we need to put in place the governance and assessment structures permanently in these contexts so that we have a more up-to-date picture, as conflict is something that evolves quickly and may impact in ways that we may not predict. So that's important. That's why we care.
Thank you so much. Ingrid, please.
Thank you. My name is Ingrid Rosta. I'm a senior policy advisor at Forum Norway. And for those of you who don't know us, which is probably a lot of you, we are a network of more than 60 NGOs, Norwegian NGOs, working on human rights, environment, climate, development, all the good things. And we coordinate Norwegian, but also from time to time international civil society in international processes. And that's our in here, because when the resolution on the environmental aspects of armed conflict was passed at UNEP 6 earlier this year, I was part of the Norwegian delegation representing Norwegian civil society and working closely with our colleagues from all across the world, pushing for this resolution in a very challenging time, because it's easy to say that a resolution passed in a kind of dull meeting room in Nairobi won't have a lot of impact. But passing a resolution on the environmental aspects of conflict in a situation with the very politicized wars in Ukraine, in Palestine, and a situation where people described it as the most challenging United Nations Environmental Assembly ever. Never ever had the negotiations been this difficult, and we were able to pass a resolution on one of the most controversial topics. So I just want everyone to take a moment to just feel that, because things are happening. Yeah. And that is incredibly important, because we talk about the environmental aspects, and to some extent I feel like people have a relationship with water pollution, the groundwater in Gaza being non-existing for many years. But we're also talking about landmines shifting because of floods. Areas that used to be safe for tens of years are now no longer safe. You don't know where the landmines are anymore. We're talking about phosphorus on the agricultural soil, blocking cultivation. And we're talking about, in Ukraine, asbestos. You don't really think about that, but when buildings packed with asbestos materials are bombed, we end up with a situation where everywhere you go, asbestos is all around you. And that's the environmental aspects of war that we don't really, I think, consider enough. And we need to take that momentum of having an actual agreement on at least somewhat strong language on the responsibilities for environmental aspects of war and make that into action. And I think that civil society can play a very important role in that. And several of our member organizations and their partners work in areas affected by armed conflict. They provide humanitarian aid, they document the consequences, they also help with cleanup of the debris and contributing to rebuilding communities, both in the more building a community, but also the physical rebuild of infrastructure. So I'll be drawing on their experiences moving forward.
Yes, thank you. Karen, please.
So, thank you so much.
You have 2 seconds? No,
yes,
no.
I have 2 seconds. I can see I just echo all the speakers,
No.
and in light of the next debate on constructive journalism, I think that's a good point. So, I think I will start by giving some credit to my team, because if it was one thing we do think about, it's asbestos, actually. So some of us do think about that. We have been working in this field for at least 20 years, Valentin, and that's why it's kind of, I'm grateful in one way that now we lift this theme and the resolution is there, but I also am kind of saddened a little bit by its necessity. So that's my first point. And then I would like to just say that there are 3 phases of war, and you all kind of reflect this. You have the pre-war, where diplomacy comes in, you have the active war and the post-war. And these will have definitely negative consequences of humans and environment, but different consequences. So also echoing your point about the constant monitoring of data, that this cannot be solved in one assessment. This is a kind of an ongoing eye of the world on each conflict that is involving. And then I would say, I think, since we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs here, that I think, the most environmental friendly thing we can do is create peace and work for peace. So, thank you. Yeah. So let's never stop talking about peace, because in the world as I see it today, it's harder to speak peace than it used to be. And I kind of miss that voice, because we can repair and we can repair and we can monitor and we can assess, and it's dreadful, and that's period. So let's never forget that. And GRID-Arendal, as an environmental organization working closely with the UN system and UNEP in particular, for us, of course, raising the environmental side of war and conflict is extremely good because this is our point of view. But then again, of course, we see, this is overlapping issues. This has to do with economy, it has to do with humanity, it has to do with cooperation in all sectors. So I think Constructive Institute again will see that this is not a debate, this is a conversation where I think we agree on many things, but still it's a very welcoming conversation for us to have. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there.
Yeah,
Please, go ahead.
of course, agree with Karen on more peace would be good. So also for this reason, that's why we're working on it around the plan. But I want to draw attention to one particular country which can illustrate some of this, which is Colombia. Because with some help from Norway, Colombia arrived at an agreement with the FARC. And there are still issues in Colombia, but there's much less violence, significant loss of violence. The immediate effect was that deforestation increased, because loggers could get access to areas you wouldn't dare to go because there was war. So the first data were bad for nature. Now the government, thankfully, both the previous one, but even more so the current one, got that, and they are now. And the other thing we've been working with Colombia on is the preservation of Amazon. And now they're inviting the next COP16, which is now the biodiversity COP, is to be held in Colombia, and their main theme is peace with nature, where in this concept of paz total, which is peace within human beings, also should connect to how to deal with nature. So that's an example, but it both illustrate that it's not a sort of automatic effect, because peace led to more activity, which also has its downside. But then when you get aware of it, you try to manage that and combine different goals at the same time. So that's going to be a very interesting conversation at the upcoming COP16 on biodiversity, how to connect, which is again a connection. And UNEA's contribution was very important, and increasingly also on the climate track. And if I may just add that overnight there was apparently a conversation between the two geniuses, Elon Musk and Mr. Trump. And Trump said that he wasn't worried about climate change, and rising sea levels would just leave more property by the sea, which is an intrigue. Which is actually wrong, because Mar-a-Lago will be flooded. But so it's other people's property. But their military, and the US military, have been the forefront of saying that right now the worry is China, Russia, and so on. In the long run, climate change is the #1 security challenge, as seen by the US intelligence and military community, because all the accumulated effect that this will create over time. So you might want to listen to them.
I love it when I don't have to ask questions. Arvin, you were first.
I just want to pick on this point that peace is not necessarily good for the environment, right? But it is, because what peace allows is inclusive processes of governance and the governance of natural resources. And we know for a fact that if processes for natural management is inclusive, and not least include those people who are most dependent on the natural resources or live close to them, the natural management of those resources is better. And that's only possible in time of peace. But we did a bit of searching in our organization. As I said, we're present in 170 countries, and it's clearly a sign of the times where we are starting to realize that you cannot think of protection of resilience work as things that you start working with the moment the crisis is there, right? So we have to be, and we see also consistently that the prioritization of the natural resource management system is low even before crisis. We have a situation now where the massive fiscal crunch, we have more than 50 countries facing debt, the debt precipice, which means that they don't have any extra resources, and it's hard to argue why should we put money into natural resource management and following making sure that we are sustainable in our practices. But that is actually what our learning is telling us, is that it is incredibly important to invest before crisis in these systems, because as the Foreign Minister just said, if it's not in place after a new piece is in place, then the rush for resources becomes even more accentuated and aggressive, and we've seen that in many different contexts.
Karen?
I'm leaving peace a little bit, so if anybody else wanted to comment on that.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is it's been one of the challenging conversations to have or the messages that haven't really gained traction is this give peace a chance. Because one thing is, does peace and how does peace and climate change come together? But it's also a very real situation we are facing now, are the increased levels of pollution because we are arming up. The nitrogen pollution in the fjords next to ammo factories are now increasing, and the climate footprint from increased military expenditure is very serious. So that's also an added argument to keep the peace conversation alive, and I think that's an even more challenging conversation to keep alive in this very critical situation. We have war on our borders, so from the civil society we really want everyone to remember that even if we are facing new security threats, we also have to remember that peace is an option.
Yes. But it should also be just peace. You would normally say that peace is always better than war. But of course, in the case of Ukraine, the view we held is that we do not think there should be an agreement right now at the situation where Ukraine and Russia are in, because it will be a heavily unjust peace, probably not stable. So Ukraine needs to come into a better position, and I'm convinced about that. But that, of course, leads to these a number of dilemmas, and the idea is to be aware of all these different things at the same time.
Yeah.
Did you want to say yes, please?
Yeah, I'm also in the peace camp here. if I have to choose, but just a few words. First, there's one other side, I think, which we maybe don't think about that much, the relationship between conflict and environment, which I think, I work with development assistance, which we see is that. So when the world has a lot of really serious conflicts to deal with, a lot of energy and effort and money goes into dealing with those things. And we see that also on the national and regional level, right? When a country is war and conflict torn, it's simply complex or difficult to have the capacity to raise the resources to deal with the more underlying long-term environmental issues. And one more thing, Colombia is a really great example, where also Norwegian development assistance, by the way, has played a big role in just this, especially on the forest side, as you know so well. But we see increasingly now also on the African continent how this plays out, right? And I'll take Somalia or countries in the Sahel as an example, where changes in the agricultural productivity or in the land, right, which changes agricultural productivity, changes where cattle can be, rivers and streams, produces conflicts between pastoralists and farmers, that's right. Changes where people can actually have cattle, so people start moving around, which again creates or re-invokes already existing conflicts. What we can do on climate adaptation, on actually supporting these countries on that, can be part of a long-term stabilization, or at least a conflict resolution. You can't stop a conflict with development assistance or climate adaptation, but it can be part of a bigger effort where you kind of understand that this is part of the problem.
Can I challenge the foreign minister for a moment on this one?
I
Because
think it was Scott first,
peace
but please go ahead.
agreements need to include these what Borrega was just talking about a moment. And he convenes the Oslo Forum every year. Why not actually be more specific on this? How can negotiable settlements in post-war or moving out of conflict situations be more explicit on agreements to find sensible management of natural resources? I think that would be a great step forward.
I agree, and I agree with that, and it is beginning actually. Before I came back to government, I was the chair of the board of the HT Center, which is the other part of Oslo Forum, and actually this link to environment has been growing on the attention of that. How that these things should be seen together, and actually one argument in favor of that is also that sometimes, entering into a space which is highly contested, highly conflictual with an environmental perspective can be more accepted. You may, if there is a real problem, right now in Afghanistan, they are extremely affected by climate change. Well, and it's really, by coincidence in a sense, well, not coincidence because climate change works at this, but after the years that Taliban came in, we've also seen the most devastating climate effects in Afghanistan. That might be an entry point to later talk about other issues because it's such an obvious problem. So that to add to your point, you could also use this as easier to say that I went to a seminar on gender equality, which is a harder starting point in that circumstance.
Unfortunately, but
too bad, which is sad.
Needed,
by the way, which is sad. Yeah.
Karen.
I think I want to pick up on two things, and I think you all mentioned it a little bit, and that's the diversion of investments, so that when all the we want peace, but there are war, as Natalia pointed to us very, very good in the beginning. So how do we do that? Because one of the worries we have as an environmental international focusing organization is that when we divert investments and also development money, one thing is to solve this issue we raised today, but there are so many other things that our worry is then, okay, so there are lack of money and lack of attention on other issues. So that's one thing I want to just raise for us all. And then it's the role that Norway could, and perhaps more importantly should, play in this while profiting on weapon export and oil and gas. I think we have a particular responsibility to definitely be part of restoration, as Arvin is now putting forward, because there are one way of building up a society again, and there's another way. So building resilient societies, building back better principles, etc., that is the foundation of the phase 3 of a conflict. So we're just a little bit, from our point of view, a little bit worried that there will be less money to focus on the ongoing climate and nature crisis. And then we, of course, see the need to do it the best we can in the restoration phase after a conflict, and monitoring the conflict as it goes.
There's actually also a positive correlation between increasing, not conflict, but geopolitical tension and climate, which is that the war in Ukraine has accelerated Europe's green transition, because you got another argument, which was you have to reduce the imports of gas from Russia. So it's actually going faster, and looking around, you'll see that a number of countries, including China, is now more aware that if they remain fossil, they are also dependent on and because they have very little themselves, they need sailing routes which can be controlled by others, i.e. the Americans, which is an added argument for becoming more sovereign, which means more green. So that is also an interesting relationship, that some people thought that the world needs to be collaborative to be greener. Actually, we now have a competitive path to a more, at least a more climate-friendly
It's
future.
a bit fragile, though, but okay, yeah.
But
Well, not really. Actually, not really, because when you have once you have the production and the grids, you have very low cost. Once you have installed windmills and solar cell, and you have the balance systems
Then
and the
it's there.
grids, then the cost is very low. So why would you do something more expensive? We just go back to fossil.
True. But yeah.
And this goes a little bit against what Vegard was saying, right? Which is generally true. What he's saying, that it's hard to prioritize. But Ukraine is a super interesting example. When the energy strategy was launched in March this year, with Norwegian funding and UNEP support as well, developing that strategy, it's one of the greenest, most ambitious energy strategies in the whole of Europe.
Yeah.
It is fascinatingly large in ambition, in a way that almost carries Europe with it, right? It's really something to study. And let me just mention one more thing, which relates to what Ingrid's perspective is. There is another, let's call it self-interest issue here, which is we know that environment issues does actually mobilize people. So, and people, as you know, as Lula and the G20 presidency has put its finger on the Pas Total idea, it's also a sign of the times where people care so much about their environment and they see the degradation so clearly that it is a force, a political force. Yes. So if you overlook it and you don't, deal with it, you will lose elections or be thrown out or yeah.
It's beautiful.
This is true. It's true, and if I may, it's also one of the drivers in China. There are several drivers. One of them is that people got, they got fed up with all this sort of grey, smell of coal and grey, and even if it's not a democratic system, the government still cares about sort of these movements among people. So that has also been so even there, you see that people mobilize on this.
Anybody? No? Can I ask another question?
You go ahead.
So good. So you mentioned this pre-conflict, during conflict, and post-conflict. But Arvind, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about what the long-term impacts are. Yes, it's not. We still have some time. What the long-term impacts on governance and environmental management are post-conflict, and then Ingrid, maybe you can also elaborate a little bit more on the role of civil society. Yeah. Karen, not a little bit brief, everybody, but maybe the role of GRID-Arendal in connection with UNEP, of course. Bård, I would like to challenge you. One thing that Norat will do from now onwards that maybe gave you some some motivation and different insight from this. And Minister, maybe you can also say, do we need more resolutions and conventions, or should we do it different? But I start in this order, Arvind.
So post-conflict governance solutions to part of the answer is that a negotiated settlement of most conflicts end by negotiated settlements, and they should include strong provisions for environmental protection and investment in environmental protection systems. And this is also what Ukraine is starting now with the environmental damage assessment system, which I think is really something also to study. But generally speaking, investing in the basics of, or let's put it, putting resource management, natural resource management at the center of a resilience strategy before conflict, of a response strategy during conflict, and immediately after conflict, making sure that there's no, let's call it lag time, because that lag time after conflict we know is often quite chaotic. And that's also perhaps where there is even more acute need for international assistance. So focusing, making sure that the ground is laid before a conflict ends, so that there is the enough and significant, the right type of support. And just also finally say one of the things that we are challenged by when we do damage assessments all around the world at a pretty high pace, is that there isn't really that much of a best practice, best practice guidance or standard on how to do this. And of course, there are many good reasons for that. For example, because of course each conflict is different, each country is different, each climatic zone is different, so they require different kind of responses. But still, there are something about the metrics that is being used, the methodologies that we apply in these assessments, which are diverging quite a bit across the world, and making sure that there's some sort of alignment across them, but it also allows us to compare and contrast and also learn better from context to context.
Civil society is in a way, everything the state can be and a lot of other things. So there's not a short answer, but I want to make everyone aware of a very interesting initiative from our colleagues at the Conflict Environment Observatory, who are looking into how civilian or participatory civilian science, what is often also referred to as citizen science, you've probably heard that term more. It's about how people can contribute to gather the data, how can we strengthen communities' ability to themselves monitor the environmental impact. And this is both interesting because it can provide access to data from inaccessible areas, which is a very big problem in live conflict, but also in some post-conflict situations. But what is also worth noting is the element that it can also help empower communities that are affected by armed conflict in taking back the rebuilding and taking back ownership of their story. And that's an element, and that is also why civil society organizations are so essential in rebuilding after war. And I would like to see more support to these research mechanisms, developing methodologies, but also a reminder that you have this very individual, civilian, citizen approach, but you also have incredibly professional NGOs who have experience. One of our member organizations, Norwegian People's Aid, is a good example of that. They have been for 30 years working on disarmament, landmines, cluster munitions, but also supporting agricultural organizations. Now they are utilizing this double experience and working on how to clean up pollution, how to both destroy explosives, but also avoid polluting agricultural soil in the Ukrainian context. And these sort of utilizing experiences, I think, is the way moving forward. And also a reminder that a lot of areas are accessible to civil society organizations that would not be accessible to state actors. And I would also just ask the Foreign Minister and anyone else in a position to do so to really support the element of access to conflict areas, because that's one of the key challenges, that a lot of the warring parties are now blocking access for environmental assessment. We talk about the blocking access for humanitarian aid. It is also blocking access for environmental assessment, blocking cleanup, and also the assessments.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it.
So what I pick up here is that cooperation is key, and also access to data and data sharing, and also guidelines to kind of make that happen. And for that, I think I'm in the UN system with the United Nations Environment Programme, and of course now my new friend here from United Nations Development Programme. We have a lot to offer in that in that respect, because when it comes to information, and when we work with information in all the three phases of war and conflict, the information is never reliable, nor is it sufficient. And that is, of course, because of propaganda, because of distortion of information, etc. So to have a kind of independent, objective enough, scientifically based environment that can do just that, I think, I mean, now I'm bragging about our own organization, but I'm allowed to do that today, since it's
and it's relevant.
It's relevant. Yeah, so I think, I mean, that is also one thing the resolution was given a mandate to, actually, to give that technical guidelines, to gather that information. So I think there is definitely a role for an organization like us in cooperation with organizations like UNDP, UNEP, and others.
Bort.
Yeah.
Some last
Well,
comments?
you know, Tina, so we're an agency, right, under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and manage resources for that. So we generally do what we're told. No, or we
Thank
we
you.
do what we're told.
You never
by
do
the
that.
Minister of
Much appreciated.
Generally.
That's why he has the last word.
But within that frame, just a few things. So first, what we have done and continue to do is to build environmental concerns and climate and environment into everything we do on development. That's essential across the board, from our own emissions to our partners to our interventions everything. Important for mitigation, but even more so, I would say, for adaptation. Extremely closely interlinked with development. Second, on Monday, we're taking over the funding of humanitarian action. We're very proud and eager to do that well. A lot of things will continue, but the Minister of International Development has been very clear. One of the goals here is to build a more holistic approach to do humanitarian and long-term development, because it's so closely interlinked in reality on the ground. Often the same countries, regions, partners, everything. We try to already today and we think Norway is a good and flexible partner, but we have a way to go. Right? We have to do humanitarian in ways that have a long-term resilience, and we have to give development partners the ability to deal and be a part of a crisis operation when it's needed. These are scarce resources. We have to use them as well as possible. Then, just finally, to what Ingrid said, which is so important, and what I see, which I see every day. I think one of the best things about Norway is the close relationship between the civil service, civil society, I would add the private sector, that we are able to, I mean, we are different, but we're able to cooperate, to use each other's strength, and in many places in the world, how that is different from many other donors, how we can actually work together, both in conflict and environment. That's extremely important.
Thank you. And before I leave you the word, do we have time for one more questions from the public after that? Because it's 45 minutes. But if not, then we don't. So the last word is to you, because I also preferred to let you speak instead of taking a lot of time myself to round it up, but I think you're better speakers than me. So please, the last word.
I think you asked about the importance of whether conventions matter.
Yes, but if you would prefer to answer or pick up on what they said, that's also
first,
fine.
there's one team I'd like to introduce. I see the Radiation Protection Authority is here, and that is the link to nuclear. I mean, obviously, nuclear war is bad for the environment, to put it mildly, the most catastrophic war you can imagine. But also, as what has been illustrated by Zaporizhzhia, that you can also have war can attack nuclear facilities, and you can have major radiation problem, which also, just to mention that. But to your question, no, yes, indeed, actually, environment, nature, climate, pollution, it's actually the area, believe it or not, may sound strange, it's the area of global politics that works best right now. I mean, UNEA 6 was a success under very difficult circumstances. UNEA 5, which I had the honor of presiding over, the Nature Agreement, the CBD Agreement from Montreal, COP26 and 28 in particular, it really brought the world forward when, a universal agreement what we need to do. And of course that doesn't transcend automatically into action. But, half of the panels in Arendal is about how can my company become Paris compliant or be more circular. So these things really matter. And why do I mention it now? So conventions matter. We need to do much more than conventions, but they do matter. And we have to make them into action. But that also means because the peace field is not doing very well. So, if you can take some of the spirit of the increased awareness on the planet that we really have a common challenge, and let that inspire the work on conflict resolution, peace dividend resolution, that is an argument in itself. So connecting these is materially correct, but it's also politically smart. And I think some of that also transcends ideology, because Chinese, European, and American and Indian researchers see the same picture. It's not like, there are old people who think they see something else, but the researchers see the same thing, and that can also forge more cooperation.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I think since we have spoken so much about peace, I make love, not war. I think this is very
The night is still young.
Yes, the night is still young. And I really would like to invite all of you to the Green Mingle tonight here in the back garden at 7 o'clock, I think. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.